Well, good morning again. My name is Liza Conboy. I'm the Business Engagement Manager with the Keck Chamber of Commerce. So it's good to see you all in person. It feels good to see some smiling faces in person. And thank you so much for attending our second annual Diversity Business Luncheon. It is a wonderful event that we get to host again this year, and I have a feeling we'll continue to do it for many years to come, so thank you for being here. Just like to give a quick thank you to our board of directors, our staff, and our DEI committee for putting on this event today. If any of those apply to you, would you please stand? Round of applause if you would. Alrighty. I'd also like to give a thank you to Lily Tran with TaxiSign for being one of our vendors today. You may have seen her in her wear just out in the hallway earlier today, so definitely be sure to stop by before you go. I'd also like to give a big thank you to our gracious host, Tanya Goodwillie, Director of Allegro Performing Arts Academy. Give the people a wave. And of course, our moderator for the day, Lawrence Garrett. He is the Chief Impact Officer for 828 Consulting.
Well, welcome everyone. You ready to do this? Yeah. Ready to get into some DEI work? Again, my name is Lawrence Garrett. I want to welcome you into this space today. A space that oftentimes can be described as awkward, uncomfortable, energizing, encouraging, thought-provoking, introspective. What are some other words when you think about entering into a DEI space or conversation? What are some other things that come up? Vulnerable. Vulnerable. What else? What else? It's vulnerable right now. People are like, oh, I'm not saying a thing right now, right?
Confusing or unknown.
Confusing. Sure. Yep, sure. What else? Anything else that stands out to you?
Misunderstood.
Misunderstood. Yes. What else?
And also opportunity.
Opportunity, absolutely. Speaking of opportunity, let me ask the crowd this. What is the purpose of DEI work? What is the end game?
So we can...
It's not a trick question either. What is it?
So we can close the gap on all of these words that we just mentioned.
Oh, wow. Yes. So how about this? Where disparities exist, equity doesn't.
Yeah.
Right? What else?
Understanding.
Understanding what?
Appreciating and understanding the similarities that we have, appreciating the differences that don't really make us that different.
Yeah, so being able to value both similarities and differences. And in our world, we call it being culturally agile, right? Having the ability to shift perspective and adapt behavior according to cultural commonality and difference. That should be something that we're anchored in. What else? Can I get two more? Acknowledging. Okay, talk to me more about that.
Yeah, it's acknowledging that what's happened, right? What's happened in the past, whether it's land or anything else, but acknowledging that things have happened.
Now, why is acknowledging important?
I think it's important because in order to move past something or close a gap or whatever that might be, it's important to acknowledge what has happened to get us here.
Correct. You can't change what you don't confront. Right? Absolutely. One more. Representation. Talk to me about that.
It's hard to move into a new space if no one, whether it's an industry or a business or whatever, if no one looks like you, shares your same experiences. It's whether it's a person of color or whether it's a woman or whether it's a disabled person or whether it's a person's age, whatever it might be, that if there's no one like you.
Right. And the question becomes viability. Is this viable for me, right? Who in this space represents my background, my identity, right? Which makes it, and that also speaks to an accessibility. Is this really accessible for me, right? I know we think of physical accessibility, but also we're talking about emotional, psychological, right? Accessibility as well. And so the more we can probably provide more of that, we have more people entering into various fields, industries, things of that nature. Well, I appreciate you all sharing your thoughts and feedback, and I hope everyone comes here today hopefully to get some of this, get some history, right? Because part of the challenge is our history, we're not really clear on what really happened, right? One of the things that I think to that point of kind of historic nature is, I think the challenge when DEI tends to be brought up from a historic standpoint, that's where all the pain and the ways that we respond to all the hurt and the harm that's happened start to go in so many different directions, right? And this is where I often feel like America needs therapy. Wouldn't you agree? We kind of need therapy. Like somebody really needs to walk us through how to process pain. How do we metabolize this in a way to do something healthy with it, right? So one of the things that I hope happens, right, not just from a knowledge perspective today from our panelists, but also from a relationship perspective, is I want you to pay attention to this particular kind of, I would say, equation. Equity without relationship is just compliance to rules. But relationship without equity is complicity to harm. What's that?
Say that again.
Equity without relationship is just compliance to rules. How many people are experiencing that in their worlds? Right? Because the relationship part isn't quite there yet, where people are still kind of silently feeling persecuted or whatever their thing they got going because somehow they haven't been brought in relationally. But then here's the other side of it. If we have relationship without equity, we're being complicit to systems of harm. Yes. Right? So we have to know how to do both of these well, right? In order for us to be effective. So I'm excited about the panelists to be able to share some of their strategies, their tools, their experiences. Because I imagine we probably all can relate here. DEI is a contact sport. Right? Right? If you haven't got hit with something, I don't know if you're in the game. Is that fair? Fair, right? And so they're going to be able, hopefully, to share some of their experience and knowledge and pour onto us. And one of the things that I hope happens is we walk away with this focal point. One, what did I learn today? Right? What did I share today? What did I feel today? What can I do today? What did I learn? What can I share? Because it's about your story, your experience, your stuff as well. What did I feel? And that's where sometimes things get lost, is us acknowledging what is being felt in the room or currently with myself, right? And then the last thing is, what can I do about it? So everyone should have a penny. I want you to pull out that penny. We're going to do an activity. Pull out your penny. Pull out that penny. You can look at the penny.
Oh, you said penny, not penny.
Pull out your penny. So here is the assignment. So you are a group. You're a group. Every table is their own group. I'm actually going to say, just because there's only 3 here, can we borrow maybe 1 or 2 from over here to come over here? Just for, what's that? 4, yeah, this one's fine. And then you're only 2 over there, so, or you want to move there, and then maybe you move over here. Instead of you going over there, they're going to come to you. Yeah, so how about you go to this one? Come over here. One go here, one go there. Okay, so everyone should have a penny. Does everyone have a penny? Yes. Yes. Okay. On that penny, there's a date. Okay, I want you to look at the date on that penny. Oh, I know. I should have. Something like I can't read that. Okay. We'll get some more. Let me share the assignment first, and then I will make our rounds and get you the okay? So here's what we're going to do. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap twice. Yep, that's that teaching in me, right? Who's familiar with that? Okay, so here's the assignment. That date, I want you to think of something, look it up on Google, something about equity and justice that happened that year. So the date on your penny, do a Google, and some people are like, well, how am I going to Google that? say anything civil rights. You can say you can even go into a specific thing. You can say something about policy with equity and inclusion. You can say something that has to do with justice. Those are some key words to do. But pick the date, do a Google search, and come up with something to share about what happened in regards, and when I say share something on how equity or justice moved forward. What happened where justice moved forward? Who would like to go first? All right, I'm going to spin around and pick a table. Boom.
I read this from a report from the city of Seattle. My year is 2011, and I'm just going to read a paragraph from one of the reports. The Seattle Office for Civil Rights released the results of fair housing testing in 2011 that revealed widespread racial discrimination in housing application procedures. 6 property managers were charged with illegal discrimination based on the test results.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. 2011, you said, correct?
Yes.
Wow. Right here in Seattle. Thank you.
And I had 2001, and that was the first country in the world. The Netherlands was the first one to legalize gay marriage in 2001. And then since, in the past 20 plus years, it's now over 30 countries.
So my year was 1994. It was called the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, and it was signed by President Clinton, and it was the largest piece of crime legislation in the U.S. history. And it was the largest ever crime bill in this country's history, providing for 100,000 new police officers and allocating $9.7 billion for prisons and $6.1 billion for prevention programs. And it included the Violence Against Women Act and a whole bunch of other offices. So what I found mostly when I was searching for this was the ramifications. Most of the articles are the ramifications of this act and how in some cases it incentivized people to be incarcerated and the money that went along to make sure that people were being incarcerated and how disproportionate it was for certain groups of people. So it is the largest, when it was signed into law, actually it was spearheaded by Biden, believe it or not, when he was a senator, and signed by Bill Clinton, and very touted at the time, but there's been a lot of ramifications. Very interesting.
Thank you. So the movie's called 13th. I highly recommend, connected to the 1994 crime bill, I highly recommend watching that Netflix documentary. Mind blowing, right? Would y'all agree? Yeah, that's gotta be, if you want to be an anti-racist equity practitioner, that's gotta be top 5 on your list. Because it breaks it down from a systems level, systematic level, systemic level, you name it, it's there, it shows it. And the money and the power that goes along with it as well. And so, okay, this table right here.
Yeah, so 2011 as well, there was, the military had 18 initiatives that they were implementing. And a decade later, only 6 of them came to be. So not like a proposal or a something, an initiative. They said they were gonna do this and only 6 got accomplished out of the 18, right? Yeah, around diversity and inclusion. Which led to further discussion around like all of the different dates that we're looking at here and how things have moved so slowly in so many ways. And yet there's been some great miracles too, like in Texas where they, what was it? Changed the...
It's the Lawrence v. Texas, which is a landmark case in which Supreme Court of U.S. in decision 6-3 invalidated sodomy law across the United States, making same-sex sexual activity legal in every state.
Right. So out of Texas came legalization of gay marriage and other things, right? And not being a crime. So cool, we've done some things. And then that also led to this generational conversation where we've got grandpas of grandpas, you know, grew up in an environment where it was okay to be and say and do a certain thing, and how that also shifts. And just noticing for myself that when I was a kid, there would be language and usage and points of view that were kind of commonplace in how I was growing up, and how that got a lot different as I grew older, but also that my girls didn't experience that. They weren't around that conversation. So there is shift and changes as we go along and make these improvements.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My year is 1997, and it had to do, one of the things I picked was the wage inequality was pretty high during 97 and 98. And I found an article that asked the question, has wage inequality stopped growing? During that time, they only grew individually as men's income raised, women's income raised, minorities or whatever, their incomes raised, but as an overall same job equity, that hasn't happened until just recently. We know the women on the soccer team got their dues, their just reward, and then with the athletes and all of this stuff that they got going, there's still an issue with, you know, how they get $1 zillion versus so many few.
Yeah.
But the ratio has taken so long to catch up, and that's horrible. But not just women, everybody, each individual should have it in their soul and then have the guts to do what they need to do to speak up for them, you know, for whatever it is that you feel you're worth. If you work less than what you know you're, you know, capable of doing better and earning more money, and move around.
Right.
You know, so we have to bring awareness to ourselves as well as the ones who we, you know, do business with. I mean, you can refuse, you know, somebody saying, well, I don't have all your money today, will you? No, I won't. So you will not
That's
be coming
right.
back. But everything changes as we allow it to change. A lot of people have the power to help things get better, but a lot of people sit on it. And those are the type of people that I like to get in the conversation with.
Thank you. That's right. That's right.
So I had 2008, and the first thing that came to mind was the election of Barack Obama, the first black president of this country.
Cool. Thank you. Well, I hope you learned something new. You got to share something awesome. And one of the things that to conclude this exercise, and we're going to move right into the panel discussion, is what's interesting about history when it comes to equity and justice. We've had the tendency, I'll speak for me, I've always had the tendency to think like, yeah, we're just kind of progressively moving forward and we're just trying to get there. But in actuality, when we really study history, it hasn't been this kind of like progressive movement to try to kind of break down barriers. It's been a tug of war. It's been a back and forth. It's been a, you know, oftentimes one step forward, two steps back, oftentimes. So the time is always now, right? The time is always now for justice because there's no neutral. And so when we keep that in mind, I want us to think about right now, 2022, November 3rd. What's our mark in Kent, within the chamber, within the broader community? What's our mark? So that if somebody did this penny exercise in 2038, what could they say about Kent? What role could you play in that? So hopefully we'll have that kind of insight, that kind of thought process as we think about how we move through time and space. And know that it takes partnership for us to get that done. So, thinking of partners, thinking of brilliance, I want us all to welcome our panelists. They're here today to share some insights and wisdom. They do have a designated question that they feel really strong about to share, so I'm going to ask each of them to kind of speak on that individually. But before we do that, I'm going to start with Meiju. Just do a quick introduction of yourself and who you are, and pass the mic to your right.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meja Qureshi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Economic Stability Director at the Multi Service Center. The camera flash is great.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Tubbs. I'm the General Manager of Staples in Kent, just right up the hill. I'm honored to be here.
Hi, I'm Todd Miner. I own Nana's Southern Kitchen in Kent and Covington, and then also I lead training, sales training for Microsoft.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Uriel Varela. I am the Race and Equity Manager for the City of Kent, and that is a relatively new position at the city. I've been there for 5 years, and then I took on the role of Race and Equity Manager.
Okay. Y'all ready to do this? All right, here we go. How does one remove bias from the recruiting/interview process? And this question is for anyone on the panel that feels they want to speak on that first.
Yeah, I guess I'll take it.
You want to go forward?
But first of all, I'm so thankful we're having this in the dance studio. Maybe I can get some moves at some point today. Look, I think the first thing with bias is recognizing that we all have bias. Unconscious or conscious, there's bias within all of us. And I think the first step is just really coming to grips with the fact that, like, even if you're well-intentioned, even if you feel like you're a good person, even if you feel like that, you wouldn't intentionally do harm to someone, you have bias in you. We all do. And I can give a story about that later. And so when we look at interviewing and to address those biases, it's really important for us that we have diverse interview panels, right? And so you have panels with folks from all different lived experiences and representation to ensure that there's no unconscious bias that sneaks in. Third, I would just say it's important that you look for questions. You seek out questions that are broad, again, that don't have bias. Seek into the questions.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've done at the City of Kent includes having diverse panels. So that is one of the things that we're asking each department, each manager who's hiring someone to have a diverse panel. The other thing that we're doing, bias is mentioned, so we are having each one of the panelists take on implicit bias training. So these are easy modules that are 5 minutes long that can go through what implicit bias means and how you can recognize it. And this is mandatory for all our hiring managers to take that 15-minute course that is provided by the Kerwin Institute out of Ohio State University that specifically studies implicit bias. So that is one of the things that we've done at the city to make sure that bias is hopefully removed as much as you can remove it from the hiring process.
I got one more thing on that. This one's a fun one. The other thing I would say is, like, even in your job requirements, like, really challenge yourself. Like, what truly is required for this job? Whether it be at Nana's or even at Microsoft, we've taken a really strong look at our requirements and just remove them and try to make them as exclusive as possible and to invite as many applicants as possible. Because there's many times like that a college degree is not necessary to be proficient in a specific area. And we all know, based on some of these coins you've flipped, that there's been systematic headwinds against certain groups going to school, right? And so I think that when you take a hard look at most of the jobs we hire, like there's probably a lot of jobs that don't require the requirements that could be a headwind for others.
Yeah, and for me, working with a smaller group of people, I think it's important to get your organization to the point where you have a diverse panel to conduct those interviews. That's something that I've definitely strived to do in my position. And then I think one of the maybe side benefits of the COVID thing was all of a sudden you were looking at applicants not face to face. You're hiring based on statistics. But that being said, it's also important, I say, to hire based on potential and not figure out reasons they can't do the job, but figure out reasons they can do the job. And especially if you're hiring entry-level positions, I think that's a huge benefit.
Thank you.
Just one last thing I wanted to add is I would say look at your consumers, right? So look at the consumers that are coming to your businesses or the community that you're serving. And so I think that is important to consider when you are making a hiring decision for a specific site that you're operating in a city like Kent. So I would just want to add that. Thanks.
All right, next question. So how do we hold managers accountable and responsible for developing plans with every employee for future growth? And I think the more kind of specific question is, how do we hold these managers kind of accountable and responsible for being practitioners of equity?
Yeah. I'm always conscious when I talk to listen ratio, I try to be, but I'll certainly try to pass the mic even more. The other thing what I would say for this one is you tie it to compensation. You know, most folks, their pay is really important to them, and specifically leaders in organizations. There should be a component of, I would recommend there be a component of their compensation tied to their DEI goals.
The one thing that I would say is that you look at your retention rates. So if you're really focused on diversity, and solely diversity, not inclusion or belonging, then it becomes a revolving door. So you're not gonna have folks who wanna stay at the job, and you're gonna have folks who are gonna leave sooner than later, and you're not gonna see their professionalism, you're not gonna see their expertise, because they don't feel included in whatever process they're a part of. So it's important that whenever we're looking at data, that it's disaggregated data, and you're able to look at retention rates as well, because there are some departments who have a very diverse group of people that work there, and others not so much. And what is that data telling us? So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, at the multi-service center, one of the things that we've done is included it as an evaluating process. And so I think that's one way by which you can hold leadership accountable.
I think, you have to hold your leadership accountable, at least in my kind of position, because essentially it's hard to retain talent. And I like what you said about, if your leadership does not give everybody a pathway to success through inclusion, then their jobs become harder anyways. So it's really important.
All right, let's go to the kind of pointed out specific questions. So I'm gonna start with you, Meisha. How do we address systemic racism inside our organization and open pathways for promotion for all employees, and then a slash for BIPOC employees?
Yeah. So the first thing that I'll kind of speak to is the importance of acknowledging what systemic issue you are going to be speaking with first, right? I think if we don't recognize what those systemic issues are at our organizations, then we're not really doing anything. So thankfully, at the Multi-Service Center, we do have an open door policy with managers, including our CEO. And in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, we had a staff member who reached out to me and said, hey, Meiju, I would love to speak with our CEO because there is something that has to be done here in regards to how we were responding as an agency in the community. And so without that open door policy, I don't think we would have progressed and taken initiative and steps to move forward. So to that employee, that was a very meaningful first step into that. So I think you have to acknowledge these systemic issues that are impacting our staff and the communities that we serve. We also added a microaggressions policy to our personnel policies in the last year, and that was done in partnership with the DEI committee that we have at the Multi-Service Center, which is comprised of staff from all departments as well as all levels of leadership. So it includes our direct services staff as well as some staff in leadership positions. Most recently, we have implemented a grade system for compensation to help that upward mobility. So we're still in the early stages of that, but that just is progression compared to where we've been before. We also have a mandatory professional development day that's offered to all staff once a year, and it is mandatory. And the professional development day usually goes over different types of topics, from implicit bias to microaggressions to neurodiversity. And so we survey our staff after these training opportunities to get more feedback for some training that they would like to see us provide. So we do, include staff in that aspect as well. A couple of other things that we've done recently is our senior management team went through almost a year-long DEI coaching, and it was individualized coaching, which was really meaningful. I'll speak for myself. I don't feel like I truly dove into my equity journey until I started the DEI coaching. And what that has prompted me to then ask for is to go back to our CEO and just stress the importance of how meaningful that was to me, and expressing the need that it needs to be extended to our DEI committee staff, our mid-management staff, as well as our board. So I would say that is important as well. In terms of addressing some of the systemic issues, as a nonprofit organization, as well as a community action agency, our leadership does participate in statewide advocacy on policies that disproportionately impact people of color. So that is something that our CEO does pretty much every month of the year. At the Multi-Service Center, we actually have a history of upward promotion, which is really interesting and awesome to recognize. And so I gathered these numbers really quickly. But 60% of our senior staff members were in a mid or direct service level, and were promoted to senior management, and 33% of those staff identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color, or immigrant. And then 63% of our mid-management team also were promoted, and 80% of those staff identify as Black, Indigenous, persons of color, or immigrants. And then I was, sharing a little bit earlier about the DEI committee. The DEI committee, helps review the strategic plan, which is done in partnership with all staff at the agency, as well as advising the CEO on matters, that she needs to be included in, as well as presenting to our board of directors.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, so we're going to go across and go to Urel. And when dealing with a non-diverse environment or individuals with little experience with diversity, how would you approach making diversity relevant or valued?
That's a good question, and unfortunately, there isn't a one answer fits all situations, so I think it depends on the situation. Having said that, there are certain steps that we can take, and I'm speaking as from an organizational perspective. I think for the most part, people value diversity. I think what kind of gets us a little bit confused or in difficult discussions is our own definition of diversity. I think we're all coming in with our own definition of what that means. So the most important thing, and this is something that we started with the city of Kent, is to normalize the language. So we have to be speaking in the same terms in order to have a good conversation that's productive. So at the city of Kent, what we did was in 2019, we started something called an Equity and Inclusion Speaker Series. So we were bringing folks from around the country, from within the city, from the state, coming in, they were subject matter experts speaking on specific topics that relate to DEI. So what was that? That was an attempt by us, by the city, to start that conversation, both internally and externally. The second thing that we did was that we created an employee resource group where these conversations can happen in a safe place, because often what happens is if you're asked to have a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, people have this fear of saying the wrong thing or insulting someone else. So what we did was that we created this space. So after the Equity and Inclusion Speaker Series was held, this series is both for our employees as well as for residents. The employees can come back into this space and ask those difficult questions. So that is what starts to normalize that conversation. The other thing that it's important to think about is, what is your ultimate goal? Is diversity your ultimate goal? Is inclusion your ultimate goal? or is belonging your ultimate goal? And I think for most work, for an organization or a company that wants to be anti-racist, your goal should be belonging. Because diversity, like I said, can be a revolving door. So that is one of the things that I have to say. And then the other thing is that we have to acknowledge the fact that most of us grew in a really segregated space, post-segregation. So for example, for me, where I grew up, it was probably 90% Latino and 10% variety of different cultures. When I went to college, I suffered from culture shock because I wasn't used to working and having conversations with people who didn't look like me. So it's important to acknowledge the fact that that socializes us to have a different opinion about others based on what we hear on TV or what we read on newspapers. So it's important that the last thing that I'll say, and it's the most important thing, is that you call people in. So I think we're so used to calling people out, and that should happen sometimes, but it's important to call people in, especially when they're afraid of asking those difficult questions. So that's what I've been doing at the city. When people have those difficult questions, they don't want to ask anyone else, my door is always open and I say, come in, let's have that conversation. It's really difficult for you to insult me. I mean, it's not hard. I pride myself in being an open-minded person, and we have to look at people's lived experiences and understand why they can have that perspective. So in closing, it's important to identify what your main goal is, normalize the conversation, and make sure that you acknowledge the fact that we all have different lived experiences that can lead to different understanding of what diversity is.
Thank you. We'll go next. We'll go with Todd. So, how do we identify all the places in the process where bias can influence our decisions and how to address and counter the bias?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say, again, as I said previously, is just recognizing that there's probably bias built into every system or process that you have in some degree. And so just being naturally curious around, like, how do you make each process or structure or system more inclusive? Look at who's getting excluded from these different systems, processes, and structures, and try to ask yourself the tough question, why? You know, when you're motivating a group of people for ambition, there's usually a couple different ways you can do it. The most old-fashioned way is a carrot or a stick. And in this space, and I just love what he was just saying, in this space, like, there's times where it might feel like it's a stick. And I would say the carrot approach, recognizing the right inclusive behaviors, giving folks recognition for being vulnerable and being open and being transparent, is a way to really encourage a growth mindset in this area. A lot of times, you know, even if folks, you know, we spend a lot of time around allyship, and we don't want to celebrate the ally. We don't want the ally to get, you know, so much credit for doing what we think is the right thing. You know, this is my personal opinion, not necessarily the opinion of any of the businesses I represent, that, you know, encouragement, recognition is going to motivate people to continue to grow, right? And so when you think about these systems, when you see systems that are working, that you start to see your ambitions being realized, or progress being realized, continue to add fuel to that fire through recognition and encouragement.
Thank you. All right, got you next, Kelly. All right, in what ways can diversity hiring benefit a team or organization?
Yeah, so when I was put up here on the panel, I thought, boy, I'm no expert in this stuff. I like when somebody said vulnerable. But, you know, I learned about diversity, equity, and inclusion through the committee, through spending the majority of my time these days in Kent. And so it seemed like an obvious question to me, you know, who wouldn't want a diverse work staff? And so I kind of looked at it from my personal growth, from a company level at Staples, and then from a community level here in Kent. And I realized I didn't even know Staples had a diversity mission statement, so that's where I started. And I was pretty impressed, to be honest. It says, we're committed to integrating inclusion and diversity into everything we do, as it impacts every aspect of our business, from finding, attracting, and retaining top talent, to boosting morale and increasing innovation, and enhancing customer relationships and supplier partnerships. Our I&D work ensures our company reflects the diverse populations we serve, support and employ, and better positions us to succeed now and in the future. It's probably pretty similar to other companies, I imagine, but I took away a couple things. In today's environment, sometimes staffing is pretty hard, hiring can be pretty tough, retaining talent is hard. So, boosting morale, I mean, working in an environment that is diverse, let's face it, it's way more fun. And you do see that morale boost on a daily basis with your team. And if it's inclusive, you're going to retain that talent if those people are given a pathway to succeed. That was my own personal experience, but I decided to kind of do some study to find out if that reflects what's going on in the world. And sure enough, I read a study that says diversity leads to helps lead to an inclusive environment, and an inclusive environment creates an accepting environment. An accepting environment is where we get a staff that wants to succeed, as compared to just showing up and punching a time card, essentially. So it sounds obvious, yet at the same time, that same study found that 55% of current workforce feels anxiety at work, and a lot of them don't like their jobs. So again, just to kind of go back, if we can get that diverse staff, that's inclusive, you're going to have a happier work staff, they're going to produce more for you. Most studies show 35% production increase. I don't know anybody that wouldn't want a 35% production increase at their place of employment. I've heard it brought up several times that Kent is the 7th most diverse city in the country. In April, one study showed we're the fastest growing diverse city in the country. So not only are we 7th now, but we're growing and becoming more diverse as time goes. So as business owners, people that run organizations, we have the resources more than probably almost anybody else in the country to give ourselves a diverse staff and really reap the benefits of that. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way I looked at that. And my biggest takeaway is, it's easy to hire a diverse staff if you live in Kent, but you have to give those people a pathway to success. And you do that through the inclusion part of the process. As I said earlier, you want to find out how people can succeed, not how they can fail. And I think that's where we're at. That's kind of what I got.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, I'm going to combine 2 questions. Feel free to answer however way you want to answer it. So, how do you reach or recruit diverse groups or traditionally underserved communities? And then what does a truly equitable recruiting process look like? So however way you want to answer on what end of that question.
So I'll speak to the first one a little bit. I think your advertising matters. So your recruitment posting, if you're looking to add a diverse staff to your team, you need to have a job description that has language and that has the clarity that reflects that. So, for example, we recently wanted to promote more bilingual speaking staff at our organization, recruit. And so we posted that in the job description saying we are seeking applicants that are bilingual in these specific languages. And I will tell you, we had the best response rate. And when we interviewed those candidates and asked them how they learned about the job opportunity, the first thing they said is it stated that bilingual language was preferred, and that's why I applied. And so I think that is a really important strategy. And in terms of the recruiting process, I think it's important to involve members of your team in that panel, right? So it's not about looking at some external group to do the recruiting process for you, but encouraging and welcoming the staff that you do have on your team to be a part of that process, because ultimately, they might be in your position one day where they will be, needing to make those decisions. So I think including them as part of the panel. For some job opportunities, we've actually invited members of the public, so customers that might have been formerly served by our programs, to represent community voice in the hiring process as well. And so we've done a couple of different things to recruit them.
I would say once you get that flywheel going to other members of communities learn about your organization, and then the door opens, and then you can build upon that success just through word of mouth is what I've had most success with.
I think both, fantastic. I guess I would just add meeting people where they are. And so like being intentional about engaging with these communities before need arrives, before your needs of hire. Because we all know business owners and folks who run businesses, there is a lot of times there's a big need in which you have a short-term pain to be able to fill this headcount, fill this open seat. And so the more proactive you can be in building a bench, talent bench of folks from underrepresented groups, you're going to have better long-term systemic success.
And the only thing that I'll add is that an inclusive environment is the best recruiting tool that exists, because once you have folks that are working within that institution or system or a company that feel included and feel like they belong, they become your recruiters. They speak to their friends, they speak to their loved ones, they speak to people who they know and talk and speak well of the organization, and that creates that sense of, oh, maybe this is an organization that I want to work for. So again, an inclusive and a belonging environment within your institution or organization is the best recruiting tool. Awesome.
Well, we're going to open the floor for questions from the audience, but in that segue, I've got a question. Okay, so I know y'all just met me today. I kind of go there, so hold on a little bit to your seatbelt here because I'm going to kind of take it there for a minute. I know you're like, what he's about to say. Who's recording this? Y'all, just kidding. But I think this is a really important question because it's one of the questions that doesn't get asked, but we know it's there, right? So I'm curious, how do you handle situations where there's someone who's on your DEI team, gets it, has the history, knows the knowledge, understands how to call things out, but the way they're going about it has actually been detrimental to actually getting people on board and achieving the goals, even though they have the right idea. They see the problem, they understand the history, they get the issue, but yet in practice, it seems like it's backfiring. We all know those. And no one's talking about those, right? So what do you do?
I always have a tendency to grab the mic and try to hold myself.
This was a tough question because in every space, the DEI space, there are people who want to do more. And sometimes it gets a little bit frustrating because it seems like it's slow. Progress is really slow. You want it to be fast. But you have to be pragmatic about your approach. You have to be calling people in instead of calling people out, because the more allies that you create within your environment, the more pressure it is for anyone who's opposed for those changes, and people eventually start listening. I think there's a study that says that once your organization reaches 30% diverse as far as staff, that diversity starts being heard. So it's a difficult thing because we do need folks that push further, but we have to be conscious that this is a generational work. Nothing's going to change within the next 1 or 2 years if it took us 400 years to get to where we are.
Yeah, I would just say a lot of times, and I think this is a fantastic question, thanks for thought-provoking us. I would say many times it's not the what, it's the how.
Yep.
Like how someone engages. And what I would recommend is I would first say to the individual, hey, thank you so much for your passion. And like try to unpack why they feel so passionate about it and just say, yeah, thank you for your passion. And then redirect that passion in a way that they would want to represent it to themselves. And so when you talk about inclusion, you know, if you apply the same principles that your ambition is to be that overly passionate person, are you creating that inclusive environment by the way you're acting? It's kind of how I would kind of try to shape it with them.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is sometimes the people on the committees aren't kind of on the ground floor dealing with the day-to-day issues that can occur. And sometimes you just have to take ownership of it yourself. Obviously, lead by example. And then, you know, I think most of us know what's right in most environments and how to make sure we have an inclusive team. I think every DEI committee has great intentions. It's just a matter of sometimes we're better if we're on the ground floor putting those into practice than maybe somebody on the committee.
Yeah, I think I would just add, you know, so I like what Todd said earlier about letting the person know, hey, I really love your passion, I love your energy, but can we just talk about maybe where the committee does need that voice to be heard, right? Maybe it's not on the committee, maybe it's doing advocacy, or maybe it's helping, yeah, maybe it's advocacy, maybe it's policy, right? Because they hold that knowledge, which we want them to share that, but how could they apply it in a different way so that the person's not taking up too much talking space in the DEI committee? So that would just be something to add. And also, just wanted to add to Uriel's comment earlier about employees kind of referring like family or friends. We just added like a referral bonus at MSC for staff that did refer individuals who applied and then were hired on. So,
That's awesome.
yes.
Cool. Questions from the audience?
I hesitated for a moment to ask this because it's, I'm all about being real, and I feel like I want to hear from somebody like Todd, who runs a small business, a restaurant, and the reality of being able to have multiple interviews and how you manage that. I think other people who have small businesses that have small staffs and limited time could learn some ways to hack that and create that. And I think specifically you were talking about removing the bias, and being able to do that is by creating, you know, multiple interviewees who will.
No, first of all, fantastic question. I'm glad you didn't hesitate. Really, I mean, the point of this whole, all of us gathering is to get these types of questions answered or addressed. Again, and I didn't say this ahead of time. I want to be humble here and say that I don't have all the answers, and so I'm giving you my perspective. At Nana's, you know, look, it's based on the legacy of my great-grandma. My grandma just used her food to bring people together. Like many matriarchs in our communities, she was inclusive before it was a buzzword. My great-grandma hugged and loved on everyone. I say that because that's the culture that we've created at Nana's, to personify the legacy of my great-grandma. And so, in each and every way that we interact with customers or potential new team members, we do it in a way that we would think that my great grandma would. Like for customers, for instance, we close at 7 o'clock. If someone comes to the door at 7:15, we open the door because my great grandma would never close the door on anybody. And so when we interact with people who have different backgrounds, instead of trying to figure out why we can't hire them, we try to find a place where we can hire them. And I will tell you, you know, one of my stories I'll tell you, I won't say her name, but we opened up Nana's in December 2019, right before the pandemic. And me and my mom at the time, I took time off from my day job, and I took 3 weeks to launch this business. And we were working, me and her were working like in the morning, changing the oil at night. It was tiring, it was raining, it was cold. And we left Nana's one night, I don't know, at like 11 o'clock. I mean, we were just beat. We just opened this place up and it was going really well. And there was a young lady walking in the middle of the night in the rain with a bunch of bags. And my mom, you know, we're from the East Coast. You know, she just rolled out the window and yelled, "Hey, honey, where you going?" And then the young lady looks over, and then we're like, "Hey, we just opened a restaurant. Come down here tomorrow." So she shows up. I dropped out of high school. She dropped out of high school. She was in between housing at that particular time. She wasn't necessarily the most extroverted. She was an introvert, shy. Beautiful smile, but very, very shy. And my mom, to her credit, she says, "I'm gonna work with you. I'm gonna give you a shot, and I'm gonna work with you." And long story short, 6 months later, she was our lead cook. And she did a fantastic job for the first year and a half that we were open. But this is somebody we met in the middle of the night on the street. And so when I say always recruiting, that's what I mean. You're always recruiting. When I say don't look at someone's current circumstance as what their potential is, potential-based hiring, like that's what I mean. Like looking at finding a way what I can do. I could easily have said like this person I could be a fantastic greeter, but we found a way to make it work because she had the desire, she had the great determination, and it worked out. And so for other small business owners, that's what I would say, and we're used to doing this. If you're a small business owner, you're surviving in these times with inflation and supply chain issues and labor issues, you know how to be agile, you know how to be creative, you know how to be innovative, you know how to do these things. You apply that same skill set to having an open mind and hiring people from all different places, and you will make progress. But thanks for the question.
Tremendous conversation, really, thanks everybody. It's really great, and obviously in this room and in this space, it's a conversation we're all comfortable with having, and we're also almost automatically somewhat aligned on where our vision, right, and where we're headed to. And yet there's communities and individuals out there that don't, right? And so I won't dive into the community side of it, but like suggestions, thoughts, how do we deal with individuals that are racist or not inclusive or not interested in that conversation?
I love real talk. We finally get some real talk. Let's get that one first. I got some. That's all.
Maybe after.
I mean, obviously, it just can't be accepted, right? And then I think it's important that we create an atmosphere in our businesses where it's just obvious that that's not accepted. You know, I was listening to Todd's answer there. You walk into his restaurant. I've done a lot of business with his restaurant over the last few years, and you know, you walk in. It's small. There's not a lot of decor in there, but boy, his people. I mean, you feel like what he's saying. You feel like you're at home. You know, they greet you. They call you honey. You know, and you just feel like, okay, this is a place I can be comfortable with. Especially, you know, I'm basically right across the street from him. If I go over there for lunch, I can totally just relax for a few minutes and feel like I'm being taken care of. If you're in that kind of environment, you know, and that's the kind of environment I strive for, you know, in my store, hopefully nobody that's racist would even want to be there, work there. And I mean, I think it's probably a simple answer, but that's the way I would combat that kind of thing. I mean, it would just be so uncomfortable to even work in a place where that's obviously not accepted.
Yeah, no, that's
yeah, so I guess like my first question is, where is this happening? So is it happening at your business? Is it happening on Facebook? Don't ever engage in this conversation on Facebook. Please don't do that. So I think like location is key, right? I'm not a business owner, so I can't give you that perspective, but if there was anyone who, you know, came into the organization that I worked at and started just, you know, kind of ranting and maybe making a lot of staff feel uncomfortable, I'd probably like move that person somewhere else first and just say, tell me what's going on, right? And it probably informs some other staff like, hey, I'm dealing with a really agitated, perhaps racist, right? individual here and I might need, some additional support. And so separating the person from the rest of the people who are trying to have a productive day and help people. And then just confronting them, right? Like, where is this coming from? Why are you so angry, right? Tell me about where this feeling is coming from. And if the person does not entertain that conversation, please leave. Like, we're not gonna serve you if you're not gonna treat our staff with dignity and respect. We're giving you dignity and respect even though you're beep. But just know that if you're not gonna be able to interact with our staff that way, then the door is over there. And so sometimes you just have to confront it. And I think if it's people that you do know or you've seen in circles, it's maybe just saying, hey, I'd like to talk with you about my equity journey. Can we meet up for coffee or whatever, right? Or drinks or what have you. So I think that's another way to do that. Okay, I think that's.
There's a couple things I would say. One, I think if someone is intentionally harmful, they get fired. Like, they just can't work. They can't work with it. I mean, that's essentially it. If someone's on a journey, they don't understand what they said or why it would be offensive, that's something totally different. That's a coachable moment. That's something that we can work through. If someone is doubts or questions the power of having a diverse, inclusive environment, other panelists have talked about the productivity gains you get from diverse teams. Again, personal example here too. Two of them. One, my daughter Mercedes, she knows ASL, American Sign Language. Like, we recorded her one time doing this with a customer. The customer gave us permission. Like, I started getting folks who use sign to communicate from all over the state of Washington. Completely increased business, for sure. We became a destination for that community because, Kent School District, she went to Kent Lake and she learned that. I hired two folks from Columbia in my Covington store. You could not imagine the increase in my Spanish-speaking customer base because they're able to come around the counter and speak to them about traditionally African-American food and the parallels to food in South America, and be able to draw that correlation, completely increase the reach of my customer base. And so, I would just say, for folks who may be on your teams or in your organizations who just say, this wokeism or whatever it is around this specific subject matter, tying it to the business outcomes and how it's grown, it's hey, it makes sense. I think is another way to do it. Even if you're in Kent right now, and you haven't found a way to tap into some of these new communities that are showing up from all different parts of the world, you're gonna be antiquated. You're gonna be out of business. Yeah. You will be out of business if you are selling something and you can't connect to the Somali community or Samoan community, Pacific Island community, Ukrainian community. If you can't connect to these communities that are coming, you will be out of business. I think it's great that she has all these flags here because folks want to feel that you understand them and their community. I love everything I heard around us, the tones of the different clothes that you wear and stuff like that. I think that's fantastic. And so that is what I would say to someone who questions this.
I would say that the ultimate goal behind racism is the dehumanization of people. And you cannot do that back to someone else. You have to give people the benefit of the doubt. You have to call people in. Having said that, there are some folks who are not going to be open-minded or not going to want to have that conversation, so know when to stop that conversation. But having said that, I think it's important to understand that I think a lot of where racism comes from where hate comes from, it comes from a point of pain. And you cannot address the pain when you're arguing. I think you have to build a relationship and have those conversations. and get to a point to understand where is that hate, or where is that pain coming from, where is that hate coming from, and can we address that?
Yeah, I would have added to that.
What's that? Oh, I was just gonna add, just really quickly, if you don't mind, yeah, I love everything that you shared there, and I would just say that the real piece to that is it's very human for us to like try to run away from those conversations we're in there. But the piece that you said early was if we just lean into that and be curious about what's going on over there, it kind of opens the door rather than it being a confrontation. Yeah, so good.
Can I
Yeah.
just add one more thing? So,
Or it's you.
I'm not sorry, but just one thing to add is part of the interview questions that my team and I use is actually we ask, why is diversity important to you? Like that is a question because again, the customer base that we're trying to serve is very diverse, so we want to make sure anyone we hire knows how to answer that question. Even if they, might not have a bachelor's degree or what have you, we're looking to hear them say that we genuinely care about this community. Like, I'd like to address systemic racism, right? So those are things that we look for in the candidates that we hire.
To your point, in regards to the dehumanization of kind of how racism works, it made me think of a lesser known quote from the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he said, "You have very little morally persuasive power when people can sense your underlying contempt for them." So when we are conveying messages and people can sense our contempt, it doesn't matter if we're right.
Yeah.
That makes sense, and that's part of the EQ piece that I think is missing oftentimes in the space, is that when that contempt shows up, people can't hear what we're saying, right? And so the other thing that it made me think about too is the curiosity piece is how do we lean into asking better questions, right? Because a well-stated question is always better than a well-stated answer. And that's what's crazy about the human brain. Like if we ask somebody a question, even if they don't answer it, they had to think about it, right? And the question itself can change somebody, right? So what I love to do in those situations, it doesn't always work, but my go-to line is, are you open to other perspectives? I'm a growth mindset person. I'm open to different perspectives, just curious if you are. They're like, well, it depends. Okay, well, right? And so what happens in that regard, and I think it's a skill that we should learn in this space, is recognizing when we're dictating, debating, discussing, or having dialogue. And there's these 4 different ways of how communication shows up in this space. But if we're not clear on our intention, we're not clear on theirs, that's where the things go awry, right? So oftentimes when I'm in that kind of arena, and I'll ask them, so are we debating right now? And that stops them, right? And I'm like, I'm good for a good debate. Let's just get a judge, let's do scorecards, let's get points, right? Let's set this up well, right? But hopefully this is a discussion, right? Because a discussion tells me my intent is I'm walking away from this conversation, hopefully learning something different than I did coming in, right? And so hopefully if we go to the dialogue space, I learned something about you differently than I did coming in, right? And so with that being said, we are right on time. Aren't you proud of me, Liza? Did it right on time. Can everyone give a big round of applause to our panelists here? Please keep clapping for the DEI committee. I would be remiss if I didn't say, hey, get our pennies back. No, I'm playing. But no, I want to thank you for your time. Keep doing the work and hope I see you around doing the good work. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.